The morning mist clung to the ancient stones of Raven's Hollow Castle like secrets refusing to be told. Guard Captain Marcus Thornfield adjusted his ceremonial sword as he made his rounds through the east wing, his boots echoing against marble floors that had witnessed 3 centuries of royal intrigue. At 35, Marcus had served the crown for 15 years, rising through the ranks with unwavering loyalty and an eye for detail that made him indispensable to the royal household. The Kingdom of Aldermere had always been a place where tradition met modernity in sometimes uncomfortable ways. King Edward VII ruled with a firm but fair hand, while his son Prince Alexander prepared for his future role as heir apparent. The prince had recently married Lady Catherine Beaumont in what the press called the wedding of the century, though those within the castle walls knew the union had been more strategic than romantic. Marcus paused outside the Queen's private study, hearing raised voices within. Queen Victoria Aldermere, the king's second wife and Alexander's stepmother, was known for her sharp tongue and ambitious nature. She had married into the royal family 5 years ago after the death of Alexander's beloved mother, and the transition had not been smooth for anyone involved. "The girl simply doesn't understand her position," came the Queen's crisp voice through the heavy oak door. "She walks around this castle as if she owns it, completely ignoring protocol and proper behavior." Marcus knew she was speaking about Princess Catherine, though he had never witnessed any improper behavior from the young woman. In fact, Catherine had always struck him as remarkably gracious and kind, often stopping to ask about his family or thank the staff for their service. She had adapted to royal life with surprising ease, winning over both the press and the public with her genuine warmth. "Your Majesty," came another voice, one Marcus recognized as belonging to Lady Margaret Ashworth, the Queen's closest confidant and advisor. "Perhaps we should consider more direct action. The king seems quite taken with her, and Prince Alexander grows more devoted each day. If something were to happen to damage her reputation." The conversation continued, but Marcus felt uncomfortable lingering. As head of security, he was privy to many private discussions, but this felt different. There was something calculating in the Queen's tone that set him on edge. He continued his patrol, making mental notes of the conversation for his private records. Later that afternoon, Marcus was supervising the changing of the guard when he noticed Princess Catherine walking alone in the rose garden. This was unusual, as she typically had at least one lady-in-waiting with her during public appearances. Her auburn hair caught the late sunlight, and, even from a distance, he could see the sadness in her posture. "Captain Thornfield," she called out, noticing his approach. "How lovely to see you." "Your Royal Highness," he replied with a respectful bow. "Is everything well? You seem troubled." Catherine smiled, but it didn't reach her green eyes. "You're very observant, Captain. I suppose I've been feeling rather isolated lately. The Queen has been, well, let's say she's made her feelings about my presence quite clear." Marcus chose his words carefully. "The adjustment period for any new member of the royal family must be challenging, Your Highness." "Perhaps in time." "In time," Catherine repeated softly. "Yes, I suppose that's what everyone keeps telling me. Though I wonder if time will heal wounds or simply allow them to fester." Their conversation was interrupted by the arrival of Prince Alexander, his tall frame cutting an impressive figure as he strode across the garden. At 28, the prince possessed the classic Aldermere features: dark hair, piercing blue eyes, and a strong jawline that made him a favorite subject of photographers worldwide. "Catherine, darling," he said, though Marcus noted a certain tension in his voice. "I've been looking for you everywhere. We're expected at the charity gala in 2 hours, and you haven't begun preparing." "Of course," Catherine replied, her public mask sliding seamlessly into place. "I was just enjoying the garden. Captain Thornfield was kind enough to keep me company." Alexander nodded curtly at Marcus, who bowed and prepared to leave. As he walked away, he heard the prince's voice drop to a more intimate tone. "Catherine, we need to talk about your behavior lately. The Queen has mentioned some concerns." Marcus continued walking, but the prince's words lingered in his mind. He had served this family long enough to recognize the subtle dynamics at play. The Queen clearly viewed Catherine as a threat to her own position and influence, while Alexander seemed caught between loyalty to his stepmother and love for his wife. That evening, as Marcus completed his final rounds, he encountered an unusual scene. Queen Victoria was speaking quietly with Thomas Blackwood, a man Marcus recognized as a freelance photographer who specialized in less than flattering royal coverage. Blackwood had been banned from official events several times, yet here he was, deep in conversation with the Queen herself. Marcus positioned himself behind a pillar, straining to hear their discussion.
"The photographs need to tell the right story," the Queen was saying.
"Something that shows her true character, her disregard for royal protocol." "That might be difficult, Your Majesty," Blackwood replied. "Princess Catherine is remarkably careful about her public image. She's never given us anything particularly scandalous to work with." Then, perhaps, the Queen's voice took on a cold edge, "we need to create opportunities for her to reveal her true nature."
Marcus felt a chill run down his spine.
This conversation had crossed from palace gossip into something far more dangerous. He quietly retreated, his mind racing with the implications of what he had witnessed. The next morning brought news that would shake the very foundations of Ravenshollow Castle. Princess Catherine had been rushed to the hospital during the night, suffering from what the official statement called sudden illness. Marcus, however, had been on duty and knew the truth was far more complicated. He had been the one to find her, collapsed in her private sitting room, a half-empty teacup beside her. The royal physician, Dr. Elizabeth Hartwell, had taken one look at Catherine's symptoms and immediately ordered blood tests. While the results were pending, she had whispered to Marcus that the princess's condition was consistent with poisoning. "Captain," Dr. Hartwell had said quietly as they waited for the ambulance, "this stays between us until we know more." But someone wanted to harm the princess. As news of Catherine's hospitalization spread through the castle, Marcus watched the reactions carefully. King Edward was beside himself with worry, pacing the corridors and demanding updates every few minutes. Prince Alexander had rushed to the hospital immediately and hadn't returned. The staff whispered nervously among themselves, clearly shaken by the incident. Queen Victoria's reaction, however, struck Marcus as oddly subdued. When informed of Catherine's condition, she had simply nodded and made appropriate concerned sounds, but Marcus detected something else in her expression. Relief, perhaps? Or satisfaction? "Such a terrible thing," the Queen murmured to Lady Margaret as they stood in the main hall. "Though I suppose it was only a matter of time. The poor girl has been under such tremendous stress lately. The pressures of royal life can be overwhelming for someone of her background." The way she said background made it clear she was referring to Catherine's relatively humble origins. Unlike previous royal brides who came from ancient noble families, Catherine had been born into the middle class and worked as a museum curator before meeting Prince Alexander at a charity event. Marcus found himself thinking about the timing of Catherine's illness. It had occurred just hours after his conversation with her in the garden, and only one day after he had overheard the Queen's suspicious meeting with the photographer. The connections were beginning to form a disturbing pattern. That afternoon, while most of the castle's attention was focused on news from the hospital, Marcus made a decision that would change everything. Using his security clearance, he accessed the surveillance footage from the previous day, particularly focusing on the areas around Catherine's private quarters. What he found made his blood run cold. The footage clearly showed Queen Victoria entering Catherine's sitting room while the princess was at a scheduled appointment with her personal trainer. The Queen had remained in the room for nearly 20 minutes, more than enough time to tamper with the tea service that Catherine used every evening before bed. Marcus made copies of the footage, securing them in his private safe along with detailed notes about everything he had witnessed and overheard. He knew that what he possessed could destroy the Queen, but it could also save Princess Catherine's life and expose a conspiracy that reached to the highest levels of the royal family. The question now was what to do with this evidence. Presenting it to King Edward would create a scandal that could tear the monarchy apart. The media would have a field day, and the public's faith in the royal family could be irreparably damaged. Yet allowing Queen Victoria to continue her campaign against Catherine was unthinkable. As evening approached, Marcus received word that Princess Catherine's condition had stabilized, though she remained unconscious. The blood tests had confirmed Dr. Hartwell's suspicions. Catherine had indeed been poisoned, though the specific substance had not yet been identified.
The official story being prepared for the press would blame a severe allergic reaction to medication. Marcus stood at his office window, looking out at the ancient grounds of Ravenshollow Castle. For centuries, these walls had protected the secrets of kings and queens, but now those same walls seemed to be hiding a would-be murderer. The weight of his knowledge felt crushing, but he knew that his duty to protect the innocent outweighed his loyalty to the institution. He thought about Princess Catherine, lying unconscious in a hospital bed, unaware that her life was in danger from the very family she had married into. He thought about Prince Alexander, torn between love and loyalty, possibly unaware of his stepmother's true nature. Most of all, he thought about his own role in this unfolding drama. As captain of the guard, Marcus had sworn an oath to protect all members of the royal family. But what happened when protecting one member meant exposing another? What happened when the greatest threat came from within the family itself? The decision crystallized in his mind like ice forming on a winter lake. He would find a way to protect Princess Catherine and expose Queen Victoria's plot, regardless of the personal cost. The evidence he possessed was powerful, but he would need to be strategic about how and when to reveal it. Marcus opened his secure phone and began composing a message to Dr. Hartwell, the one person he trusted to help navigate this dangerous situation. Together, they would find a way to save Catherine and preserve the integrity of the crown, even if it meant confronting a queen who would stop at nothing to eliminate her perceived rival. The ancient stones of Ravenshollow Castle had witnessed many secrets over the centuries, but none quite like this. In the shadows of tradition and ceremony, a deadly game was being played, with the future of the monarchy itself hanging in the balance. And, at the center of it all stood Marcus Thornfield, a loyal guard who would soon discover that sometimes protecting the crown meant defying it. The morning after Princess Catherine's hospitalization brought an unusual stillness to Ravenshollow Castle. The normal bustling activity of the royal household had been replaced by hushed whispers and nervous glances. Marcus Thornfield arrived at his post earlier than usual, having spent a sleepless night reviewing the evidence he had gathered and planning his next moves. Dr. Elizabeth Hartwell had responded to his encrypted message within hours, agreeing to meet him at a discreet location off the castle grounds. As one of the royal family's most trusted physicians, she had access to information that could prove crucial in building their case against Queen Victoria. Before leaving for their clandestine meeting, Marcus decided to conduct one more sweep of Catherine's quarters. Using his master key, he entered the princess's private sitting room, the scene of the suspected crime. Everything appeared normal at first glance, but Marcus's trained eye noticed subtle details that others might miss. The tea service had been thoroughly cleaned and replaced, which struck him as odd given the circumstances. Typically, when a member of the royal family fell ill, their personal effects would be preserved exactly as they were until the cause was determined. Someone had been very thorough in removing any potential evidence. Marcus carefully examined the room, taking photographs with a special camera he used for security documentation. Behind Catherine's favorite reading chair, he discovered something interesting: a small vial, no larger than a perfume sample, wedged between the cushions. The vial was empty, but traces of an oily residue clung to its sides. Using a handkerchief to avoid contaminating potential fingerprints, Marcus carefully secured the vial in an evidence bag. This could be the smoking gun they needed, but it would require laboratory analysis to determine its contents and origin. His examination was interrupted by voices in the hallway. Marcus quickly pocketed the evidence and moved to the window, pretending to check the security of the latches. Queen Victoria entered with Lady Margaret and 2 members of the housekeeping staff. "I want this room thoroughly cleaned and aired out," the Queen commanded. "The last thing we need is whatever made the poor girl ill lingering in the environment." "Of course, Your Majesty," replied Mrs. Henderson, the head housekeeper. "Should we also replace the furnishings? Sometimes fabric can hold on to unpleasant influences." "An excellent suggestion," the Queen agreed. "Have everything replaced within the week. When Catherine returns, she'll find her quarters completely refreshed." Marcus found this level of concern suspicious. If the Queen truly believed Catherine had suffered an allergic reaction, why would such extreme cleaning measures be necessary? Unless, of course, she was trying to eliminate any remaining traces of whatever substance had been used to poison the princess. Captain Thornfield, Lady Margaret noticed him by the window. How thorough of you to personally inspect the security measures. Though I must say, it seems rather late for such precautions.
The comment carried an undertone that made Marcus's skin crawl.
Was she implying that he had failed in his duty to protect Catherine? Or was this a subtle threat, a warning that his investigation had been noticed?
Security is never a matter of timing, Lady Ashworth, he replied diplomatically.
Proper protocols must always be maintained, regardless of circumstances. Queen Victoria studied him with calculating eyes. Indeed, Captain.
Speaking of protocols, I trust you understand the importance of discretion during this difficult time.
The family's privacy must be protected, especially when dealing with such sensitive medical matters. Of course, Your Majesty. Discretion is fundamental to my position.
Good, the Queen smiled, but it didn't warm her cold gray eyes.
I'm sure we can count on your continued loyalty to the crown.
After the Queen's party departed, Marcus lingered in the room, his mind racing. The conversation had felt like a chess match, with each side probing the other's knowledge and intentions. Queen Victoria clearly suspected that he might know more than he was letting on, while he was increasingly certain of her guilt. An hour later, Marcus met Dr. Hartwell at a small cafe in the village below the castle. The physician looked exhausted, her usually immaculate appearance showing signs of the stress she had been under since Catherine's collapse. "Thank you for coming," Marcus said as they settled into a corner booth away from other customers.
"I assume you have news about the princess's condition?"
"She's stable, but still unconscious," Dr. Hartwell replied, her voice tight with concern. "The toxicology results are disturbing. We found traces of a rare alkaloid in her system, something called cyclotoxin.
It's derived from water hemlock, one of the most poisonous plants in Europe." Marcus felt his stomach drop. That's not something someone could accidentally ingest. Absolutely not. This was deliberate, calculated poisoning.
What's worse, cyclotoxin is particularly insidious because it can be tasteless and odorless when properly prepared.
The victim might not realize anything was wrong until it was too late. How long does someone have after ingestion?
It varies depending on the dosage, but typically between 4 to 8 hours.
Catherine was incredibly fortunate that she collapsed when she did.
If she had gone to bed as usual, she might not have survived the night. The implications were chilling. Someone had not just wanted to harm Catherine, they had planned her death with scientific precision. Marcus shared what he had discovered in Catherine's room, including the surveillance footage and the mysterious vial. Dr. Hartwell examined the vial carefully. This could contain residue from whatever delivery method was used. "I have contacts at the forensic laboratory who can analyze it discreetly, without going through official channels."
"How discreet?"
"Discreet enough that certain members of the royal household won't be alerted to the investigation," she replied meaningfully. They discussed their next steps carefully. While the evidence was compelling, it wasn't yet sufficient to make formal accusations against Queen Victoria. They needed more proof, particularly something that would establish motive and opportunity beyond reasonable doubt.
"There's something else," Dr. Hartwell said, lowering her voice. "Prince Alexander has been asking difficult questions about his wife's condition.
He's not accepting the allergic reaction story, and he's been pressuring me for more detailed medical information."
"What have you told him?"
"The truth, within reason. That his wife was poisoned and that it was almost certainly intentional."
"He's not taking it well." Marcus could imagine.
Prince Alexander was known for his protective nature, and learning that someone had tried to murder his wife would push him to the edge. The question was whether he would be an ally in their investigation or a liability who might act rashly. "We need to approach him carefully," Marcus said. "If he confronts the Queen directly without proper evidence, she could destroy what proof we do have and potentially harm Catherine again." Their conversation was interrupted by Marcus's encrypted phone buzzing with an urgent message. It was from his deputy, Lieutenant James Morrison, who was covering his duties at the castle.
"Captain, urgent situation developing.
King Edward has called an emergency family meeting.
Queen Victoria insists on visiting Princess Catherine at the hospital this afternoon. Prince Alexander is refusing to allow it. Tensions are escalating rapidly.
Marcus and Dr. Hartwell exchanged worried glances. A public confrontation between the prince and his stepmother could expose their investigation prematurely, potentially putting Catherine in even greater danger.
I have to get back, Marcus said, standing quickly. Can you ensure Catherine's safety at the hospital?
I've already arranged for additional security, officially for privacy reasons.
No one gets near her without my personal authorization.
They parted ways, each returning to their respective responsibilities in what was becoming an increasingly dangerous game. Marcus drove back to Raven's Hollow Castle with his mind focused on damage control and protecting the investigation they had begun. He arrived to find the castle in chaos. Raised voices echoed from the king's private study, where the emergency family meeting was taking place. Marcus positioned himself in the adjacent corridor, where his security duties gave him legitimate reason to be present.
This is absolutely ridiculous, Alexander, came Queen Victoria's sharp voice.
Catherine is my stepdaughter-in-law, and I have every right to visit her during this terrible time. With all due respect, Victoria, Catherine is my wife, and she nearly died last night. Prince Alexander's voice was tight with barely controlled anger.
Forgive me if I'm not particularly trusting of anyone right now. What exactly are you implying? The Queen's tone turned dangerously cold.
King Edward's deeper voice cut through the tension.
Enough, both of you. This family is under enough strain without accusations and suspicions tearing us apart further. Father, I'm not making accusations, Alexander replied.
I'm simply saying that until we know exactly what happened to Catherine, I'm limiting access to her medical team and immediate family only.
And what about the media? Lady Margaret's voice joined the conversation. The press is asking increasingly pointed questions about the princess's condition.
If we appear divided or secretive, it will only fuel more speculation. Marcus heard footsteps approaching the door and quickly moved to appear busy with security checks. The door opened, and King Edward emerged, looking every one of his 63 years. The stress of the situation had aged him visibly overnight. Captain Thornfield, the king noticed him immediately.
I trust security arrangements at the hospital are satisfactory? Yes, Your Majesty. Dr. Hartwell is coordinating with hospital security to ensure Princess Catherine's privacy and safety. Good. And here at the castle? Any concerns I should be aware of?
Marcus chose his words carefully. I've increased patrols and implemented additional security protocols as a precautionary measure. Given the circumstances, it seemed prudent. King Edward studied him with keen eyes that had seen decades of palace intrigue.
Precautionary against what, exactly?
The question hung in the air like a challenge. Marcus realized that the king might already suspect that Catherine's illness wasn't accidental, but was testing to see what his head of security might know. Until we understand what caused Princess Catherine's condition, I believe it's wise to be prepared for any possibility, Your Majesty. The king nodded slowly.
Quite right, Captain. Quite right indeed.
As King Edward returned to his study, Marcus caught a glimpse of the scene inside. Queen Victoria sat rigidly in a high-backed chair, her face a mask of controlled fury.
Prince Alexander stood by the window, his hands clenched into fists at his sides.
Lady Margaret hovered near the Queen like a protective shadow, her eyes darting nervously between the other family members. The tension in that room was palpable, a powder keg waiting for the right spark to explode. Marcus realized that their careful investigation might be overtaken by events if the family confrontation continued to escalate. His phone buzzed again with another message from Dr. Hartwell, lab results expedited.
Meet me tonight at the same location. Bring everything you have. This is bigger than we thought.
As evening approached, Marcus found himself walking through the castle corridors that had become as familiar to him as his own home. But now these walls seemed to whisper with secrets and hidden dangers.
Somewhere within this ancient fortress, a would-be murderer walked freely, possibly planning their next move. The weight of responsibility pressed down on his shoulders.
Princess Catherine lay unconscious in a hospital bed, trusting in the system to protect her.
Prince Alexander struggled with suspicions he couldn't quite voice.
King Edward maintained the dignity of the crown while privately questioning everything he thought he knew about his family. And Queen Victoria continued her dangerous game, perhaps growing more desperate as the investigation closed in around her. Marcus knew that desperate people were capable of desperate acts, and he feared that Catherine's poisoning might be only the beginning of a larger, more sinister plot. The ancient stones of Ravenshollow Castle had witnessed many dramas over the centuries, but few had carried such high stakes. The future of the monarchy, the life of an innocent woman, and the integrity of the crown itself all hung in the balance, waiting to see which side would prevail in this deadly game of royal chess. The laboratory results that Dr. Hartwell shared with Marcus that evening changed everything. They sat in the same quiet cafe, but this time the atmosphere was electric with urgency and danger. The forensic analysis of the vial Marcus had discovered revealed not just traces of cytotoxin, but also fingerprints that could prove decisive in their case. The prints are clear enough for identification, Dr. Hartwell explained, sliding a manila envelope across the table. But here's what's truly disturbing: the concentration of toxin residue suggests that this was just one of multiple doses. Someone has been slowly poisoning Catherine over weeks, possibly months. Marcus felt his blood run cold.
You mean this wasn't a single attempt on her life? I'm afraid not.
The toxicology report shows trace amounts of various alkaloids that have been building up in her system over time.
What happened the other night was likely an overdose, either intentional or accidental.
Someone miscalculated the dosage.
The implications were staggering. This wasn't a crime of passion or a single moment of desperation.
Someone had been systematically attempting to murder Princess Catherine through a carefully orchestrated campaign of slow poisoning. The level of premeditation was chilling.
There's more, Dr. Hartwell continued. I've been reviewing Catherine's medical records from the past 6 months. She's been complaining of headaches, fatigue, and occasional nausea.
I initially attributed these to stress from adjusting to royal life, but now I realize they were early symptoms of chronic poisoning. Marcus reviewed the fingerprint analysis, though he already suspected what he would find. The prints belonged to Queen Victoria, confirming what the surveillance footage had suggested. But having proof and knowing how to use it were two different things entirely.
We need to move carefully, Marcus said. If we confront the Queen directly, she could deny everything and destroy whatever evidence we haven't found yet.
Worse, she might try to harm Catherine again before we can protect her.
About that, Dr. Hartwell's expression grew even more serious. Catherine regained consciousness this morning.
She's weak, but she's asking questions about what happened. She deserves to know the truth, but I'm worried about how she'll react. The thought of telling Princess Catherine that her stepmother-in-law had been trying to kill her was almost unbearable. The young woman had already been struggling with her place in the royal family, and this revelation would shatter whatever sense of security she had managed to build.
What did you tell her?
That she had been poisoned, but we were still investigating how and by whom.
She's intelligent, Marcus.
She's already starting to connect the dots, especially regarding the Queen's treatment of her.
They were interrupted by Marcus's phone ringing.
The caller ID showed Prince Alexander's private number, which was unusual. The prince rarely contacted security directly unless there was an emergency. Captain Thornfield, Alexander's voice was strained when Marcus answered.
I need to see you immediately. There's been a development.
Of course, Your Royal Highness.
Where would you like to meet? My private study. Come alone, and, please, be discreet.
Marcus ended the call and looked at Dr. Hartwell with concern.
The prince wants to see me.
I think he may have discovered something on his own. Be careful, she warned.
If Alexander confronts his stepmother without proper preparation, this whole situation could explode.
Marcus returned to Ravenshollow Castle to find it unusually quiet. The evening shift of guards was in place, but there was a tension in the air that hadn't been there when he left. He made his way to Prince Alexander's study, a comfortable room filled with books and personal mementos that reflected the prince's interests in history and archaeology. Alexander was standing by the fireplace when Marcus entered, but he looked nothing like the composed royal air that the public knew. His hair was disheveled, his clothing wrinkled, and his eyes held a wild quality that spoke of a man pushed beyond his limits. "Your Royal Highness," Marcus began, but Alexander cut him off with a wave of his hand. "Drop the formalities, Marcus. We've known each other too long for that." Alexander's voice was raw with emotion. "I know what's been happening to my wife." Marcus remained silent, waiting for the prince to continue. "I've been going through Catherine's things, trying to understand what could have made her so sick. I found her private diary, hidden in a compartment of her jewelry box." Alexander held up a leather-bound journal. "She's been documenting everything, Marcus. Every suspicious incident, every strange illness, every time she felt like someone was watching her." The prince opened the diary to a bookmarked page and began reading aloud. "March 15th, felt dizzy and nauseous after tea with Victoria. She insisted I try a special blend she had imported from India. Said it would help with my headaches. April 2nd, another headache after spending the afternoon in Victoria's sitting room. She served that same tea again, claimed it was her favorite. April 20th, V suggested we have a private lunch, just the two of us, to discuss my role in upcoming charity events. Felt ill for days afterward." Alexander's hands shook as he turned the pages. "There are dozens of entries like this, Marcus. My wife has been documenting her own murder, and I was too blind to see it." Marcus approached the prince carefully. "Your Royal Highness, I need to share something with you. Dr. Hartwell and I have been conducting our own investigation." He outlined what they had discovered, from the surveillance footage to the laboratory results. Alexander listened with growing fury, his face darkening with each revelation. "My stepmother," he said finally, his voice barely above a whisper. "My father's wife. The woman who stood beside us at our wedding and promised to welcome Catherine into the family. We believe Lady Margaret Ashworth may be involved as well," Marcus added. "They've been working together to orchestrate this." Alexander slammed his fist against the mantelpiece. "I should have protected her. I should have seen the signs." "You couldn't have known," Marcus said firmly. "The poisoning was subtle, designed to mimic stress-related illness. Even the royal physicians didn't suspect foul play initially." "But Catherine suspected," Alexander replied, holding up the diary. "She knew something was wrong, and she tried to tell me. I remember her mentioning feeling unwell after spending time with Victoria, but I attributed it to the normal tensions between them." The prince began pacing the room like a caged animal. "What's our next move? How do we stop her?" Carefully, Marcus emphasized. "We need to build an airtight case before we make any accusations. The evidence is strong, but we need to be certain it will hold up under scrutiny. Meanwhile, my wife lies in a hospital bed, and my stepmother continues to walk free through these halls." Alexander's voice rose dangerously. "How do I sit across from her at dinner tomorrow night and pretend nothing has happened?" "You don't," Marcus replied. "In fact, I think it would be wise for you to maintain some distance from Queen Victoria until we're ready to act. Any confrontation now could compromise the investigation and potentially put Catherine in more danger." Alexander stopped pacing and fixed Marcus with an intense stare. "You think Victoria might try to harm Catherine in the hospital?" "It's possible. Dr. Hartwell has increased security, but your stepmother has resources and connections we might not anticipate." The prince nodded grimly. "Then, we need to accelerate our timeline. How quickly can we move?" "I want to review the castle's security footage more thoroughly, looking for other instances where Queen Victoria might have had access to Catherine's food or drink. I also want to examine the Queen's private quarters, though that will require careful planning." "You have my full authorization," Alexander said immediately. "Whatever you need, whenever you need it." "There's one more thing," Marcus hesitated. "We should consider involving King Edward in the investigation. This conspiracy could potentially threaten the entire royal family." Alexander's expression darkened further. "My father, he's been so happy since marrying Victoria. She's brought stability to his life after my mother's death. This revelation will destroy him."
Which is exactly what Queen Victoria might be counting on, Marcus realized. If she eliminates Catherine and, then, something happens to you, she would be in a position of tremendous influence over the king. The possibility sent chills through both men. They were dealing with someone whose ambitions might extend far beyond simple jealousy or personal animosity. Their discussion was interrupted by a soft knock at the door. Both men froze, realizing how their conversation might sound to an outside observer. "Who is it?" Alexander called out. "Lady Margaret Ashworth, Your Royal Highness. The Queen sent me to invite you to join her for tea in her private salon." Marcus and Alexander exchanged meaningful glances. The timing of this invitation was suspicious, coming so soon after Alexander had discovered his wife's diary. "Please give the Queen my regrets," Alexander replied carefully. "I'm not feeling well this evening. Perhaps tomorrow." "Of course, Your Royal Highness. The Queen hopes you'll feel better soon." They waited until Lady Margaret's footsteps had faded down the corridor before speaking again. "She was listening," Alexander said with certainty. "Margaret always does that pause and listen thing when she thinks she might overhear something interesting." "Which means Queen Victoria knows we met privately," Marcus concluded. "She may be starting to suspect that we're onto her." The game was accelerating, and both sides were running out of time. Marcus realized that they needed to act soon, before Queen Victoria decided to take more drastic measures to protect herself. "I'm going to visit Catherine tomorrow," Alexander announced. "I need to prepare her for what's coming, and I want to hear her thoughts on our evidence." "Be careful what you say within the hospital," Marcus warned. "We don't know how far Queen Victoria's network extends." As Marcus prepared to leave, Alexander stopped him with one final question. "Marcus, do you think my stepmother is capable of murder? I mean, actually taking a life with her own hands?" Marcus considered the question seriously. "Your Royal Highness, I believe Queen Victoria is capable of whatever she thinks is necessary to achieve her goals. The question isn't whether she can kill, but whether she believes she can get away with it." That night, as Marcus returned to his own quarters in the castle, he noticed lights on in Queen Victoria's wing long past her usual bedtime. Shadows moved behind the curtains, suggesting intense activity or conversation. Something was happening, and Marcus had the uncomfortable feeling that their investigation had triggered a response from their target. Queen Victoria was planning something, and, whatever it was, it would likely happen soon. Marcus spent the night reviewing every piece of evidence they had gathered, preparing for what he suspected would be a final confrontation. The truth was finally within reach, but the most dangerous part of their investigation was yet to come. The ancient walls of Raven's Hollow Castle seemed to pulse with anticipation, as if the very stones knew that centuries of royal tradition hung in the balance. By tomorrow, either justice would prevail, or a murderer would consolidate her power through blood and betrayal. The morning brought news that confirmed Marcus's worst fears. Dr. Hartwell called before dawn with an urgent update. Someone had attempted to enter Princess Catherine's hospital room during the night shift. Security cameras showed a figure in medical scrubs approaching the princess's door, but they had fled when confronted by the additional guards Dr. Hartwell had positioned there. The person was wearing a surgical mask and cap, so we couldn't get a clear identification, Dr. Hartwell explained over the encrypted phone. But the body type and movement patterns suggest it was a woman, someone familiar with hospital layouts and procedures. Marcus felt his stomach drop. Queen Victoria has extensive charitable connections with the hospital. She would know the building intimately. That's what I was afraid of. Marcus, we can't wait any longer. If she's desperate enough to attempt something at the hospital, Catherine's life is in immediate danger. Agreed. It's time to involve King Edward and bring this to a conclusion. Marcus quickly dressed and made his way through the castle corridors, noting increased activity in Queen Victoria's wing. Several staff members were moving luggage, and he overheard fragments of conversation about urgent travel plans and extended stays abroad. This was it. Queen Victoria was preparing to flee, probably sensing that her crimes were about to be exposed. They had hours, maybe less, before she disappeared beyond the reach of justice. Marcus found Prince Alexander already awake and dressed,
pacing his study with Catherine's diary in his hands.
The prince looked like he hadn't slept at all. She tried to get to Catherine last night, Alexander said without preamble. Dr. Hartwell called me 20 minutes ago. I know.
We need to act now, before she tries again or disappears entirely.
My father is having his morning coffee in the breakfast room, Alexander said. It's time to tell him everything.
They made their way through the castle, Marcus carrying a secured briefcase containing all the evidence they had gathered. The morning sunlight streaming through the tall windows seemed incongruous with the dark revelations they were about to share. King Edward was indeed in the breakfast room, reading the morning papers while enjoying his traditional English breakfast. At 63, he remained an imposing figure, with silver hair and the kind of dignity that came from decades of public service. He looked up with surprise as his son and head of security entered together.
Alexander, Marcus.
You both look rather serious for such an early hour. Father, we need to speak with you about something urgent, Alexander began, his voice tight with emotion.
It's about Catherine's condition, and about Victoria.
King Edward set down his newspaper, his expression growing concerned.
What about Victoria? And, please, sit down.
You're both making me nervous.
Marcus and Alexander took seats across from the king.
Marcus opened his briefcase and began laying out the evidence: photographs, laboratory reports, surveillance footage stills, and Catherine's diary. Your Majesty, Marcus began carefully, we have reason to believe that Princess Catherine's illness was not accidental. She was poisoned, and we believe Queen Victoria was responsible.
The color drained from King Edward's face. That's impossible. Victoria loves Catherine like a daughter.
Father, please look at the evidence, Alexander said gently, pushing Catherine's diary across the table.
Catherine has been documenting suspicious incidents for months.
King Edward read several entries, his expression growing increasingly horrified. When Marcus showed him the laboratory results and explained about the fingerprints on the vial, the king aged visibly before their eyes. The cycutoxin, the systematic poisoning over months, the attempt to access Catherine's hospital room, Marcus explained. It all points to a calculated plan to eliminate the princess.
But why?
King Edward asked, his voice barely above a whisper.
Why would Victoria want to harm Catherine? Alexander exchanged glances with Marcus before answering.
We believe it's about succession and power. With Catherine gone, and if something happened to me, Victoria would be in a position to significantly influence the monarchy's future.
You think she would try to harm you as well? It's possible, Father. We think Catherine was just the first step in a larger plan.
King Edward sat in stunned silence for several minutes, processing the magnitude of what he was learning. Finally, he looked up with eyes that held both grief and determination.
What do you need from me?
We need to confront Queen Victoria before she leaves the country, Marcus explained.
We have evidence that she's preparing to travel abroad, possibly permanently. And we need to ensure Catherine's continued safety, Alexander added. As long as Victoria is free, my wife is in danger.
King Edward stood slowly, suddenly, looking every one of his years.
Very well.
Summon Victoria to my private office immediately.
And, Marcus, I want you to coordinate with local law enforcement. If these allegations prove true, this matter will require more than just family discipline.
As they prepared to leave the breakfast room, King Edward stopped them with one final question.
Is there any possibility that we're wrong? Any chance this could all be some terrible misunderstanding?
Marcus looked at the man who had been his sovereign for 15 years, seeing the desperate hope in his eyes.
Your Majesty, I wish there were. But the evidence is overwhelming. Queen Victoria has been systematically attempting to murder Princess Catherine.
The confrontation took place in King Edward's private office, a room that had witnessed centuries of royal decisions and family crises. Queen Victoria arrived within minutes of being summoned, accompanied by Lady Margaret Ashworth. Both women appeared composed, but Marcus noted subtle signs of tension: Victoria's too perfect posture, Margaret's fidgeting hands. Edward, darling, Queen Victoria smiled as she entered.
You wanted to see me urgently? I hope nothing is wrong. Please sit down, Victoria, the king said coldly. You too, Lady Margaret. Marcus positioned himself near the door while Alexander stood beside his father's desk. The evidence was laid out on the desk between them like an accusation. Victoria, King Edward began, his voice heavy with grief, I have learned some very disturbing things about Catherine's condition. Things that suggest her illness was not natural. Queen Victoria's expression didn't change, but Marcus noticed her hands tighten almost imperceptibly in her lap. What do you mean, not natural? She was poisoned, Alexander said bluntly. Systematically, over months, with plant alkaloids that would have eventually killed her. That's absurd, Lady Margaret interjected. Who would do such a thing? King Edward picked up the laboratory report. According to the forensic analysis, your fingerprints were found on a vial containing traces of the same poison that nearly killed my daughter-in-law. For the first time, Queen Victoria's composure cracked slightly. There must be some mistake. I would never harm Catherine. Would you care to explain why surveillance footage shows you entering Catherine's private quarters while she was out? Marcus asked. Or why you met secretly with a disgraced photographer, discussing opportunities to damage Catherine's reputation? Queen Victoria's eyes flashed dangerously. You've been spying on me? How dare you? How dare I? Alexander stepped forward, his voice rising. You tried to murder my wife. This is ridiculous, Victoria stood abruptly. I won't sit here and listen to these wild accusations. Edward, surely you can't believe this nonsense. King Edward looked at his wife with an expression of infinite sadness. Victoria, I've seen the evidence. The fingerprints, the surveillance footage, Catherine's diary entries documenting months of suspicious incidents. How do you explain all of this? I don't have to explain anything. Victoria's mask finally slipped completely, revealing the cold calculation beneath. You have no real proof, just circumstantial evidence and the paranoid ravings of a girl who never belonged in this family anyway. The admission hung in the air like a death sentence. Even Lady Margaret looked shocked by the Queen's sudden honesty. You're right about one thing, Alexander said quietly. We might not have enough evidence for a criminal conviction. But we have more than enough to expose you publicly and ensure you never harm Catherine again. Queen Victoria's laugh was bitter and sharp. Expose me? Do you have any idea what that would do to the monarchy? The scandal would destroy everything your family has built over centuries. Perhaps, King Edward said slowly. But protecting a murderer would destroy it more completely. I'm not a murderer. Victoria snapped. The girl is still alive, isn't she? If I had truly wanted her dead, she would be. Another admission, another nail in her coffin. Marcus made a note to ensure this conversation was being recorded through the office's security system. So you admit to poisoning her? Alexander demanded. Victoria looked around the room, finally, realizing that her situation was hopeless. But, instead of contrition, her expression hardened into defiance. Catherine was weak, she said coldly. She would have destroyed this monarchy with her common background and naive ideals. I was protecting the crown, protecting everything our ancestors died for. By committing murder? King Edward's voice was filled with disgust. By doing what was necessary. Victoria's composure shattered completely. Do you think I enjoyed watching that little nobody parade around, playing princess while having no understanding of what it means to serve the crown? She was going to ruin everything. Lady Margaret finally spoke up, her voice shaking. Victoria, perhaps we should contact a lawyer before saying anything more. It's too late for lawyers, Margaret, Queen Victoria replied with bitter satisfaction. They have what they came for. Marcus stepped forward. Queen Victoria, I'm placing you under citizen's arrest for the attempted murder of Princess Catherine. Lady Margaret Ashworth, you're also under arrest as an accessory to attempted murder. You can't arrest me. Victoria shrieked. I'm the Queen of Aldermere. Not anymore, King Edward said quietly. As of this moment, your marriage to me is annulled, and you have no claim to any royal title or privilege. The finality in his voice seemed to break something in Victoria. She collapsed into her chair, the fight going out of her as suddenly as it had flared. "Edward," she said, her voice suddenly small and vulnerable. "I did it for us. For the monarchy. I thought if Catherine was gone, things could go back to the way they were." "The way they were?" King Edward shook his head sadly. "Victoria, we were happy, but that happiness was built on a lie. You're not the woman I thought I married." Marcus called for additional security while they waited for local law enforcement to arrive. As Queen Victoria and Lady Margaret were led away in handcuffs, the former queen turned back for one final comment. "You'll regret this," she said to King Edward. "The scandal will destroy everything you're trying to protect." "Perhaps," the king replied. "But living with a lie would have destroyed it more surely." As the arrest party departed, father and son stood together in the sudden quiet of the office. The evidence of Victoria's crimes remained scattered across the desk like the remnants of a shattered life. "We need to go to Catherine," Alexander said finally. "She needs to know it's over." Marcus began gathering the evidence. "The press will be all over this story within hours. We should prepare a statement." King Edward nodded wearily. "Marcus, coordinate with the palace communications team. We'll tell the truth, as much as we can without compromising the legal proceedings." As they prepared to leave for the hospital, King Edward stopped at the office window, looking out over the grounds of Ravenshollow Castle. 15 years, he said quietly. "I've been king for 15 years, and I've never faced anything like this." "How do you move forward when someone you love tries to destroy everything you hold dear?" Alexander placed a hand on his father's shoulder. "One day at a time, father. And, with the truth." The ancient stones of Ravenshollow Castle had witnessed the end of Queen Victoria's reign of terror. But the aftermath of her crimes would reshape the royal family forever, testing their resilience and their commitment to justice over convenience. 6 months after Queen Victoria's arrest, Ravenshollow Castle had begun to heal from the wounds of betrayal and attempted murder. The media frenzy that followed the revelation of the poisoning plot had been intense but ultimately manageable, thanks to careful coordination between Marcus Thornfield, the palace communications team, and law enforcement. Princess Catherine had made a full recovery, though the psychological scars of learning that her stepmother-in-law had systematically tried to kill her would take longer to fade. She stood now in the very garden where she had first confided her troubles to Marcus, but her demeanor was transformed. Where once there had been uncertainty and vulnerability, there was now a quiet strength born of surviving something unthinkable. "Captain Thornfield," she called out, her voice warm with genuine affection as she spotted him on his evening rounds. "How wonderful to see you." Marcus approached with his customary respectful bow, though their relationship had evolved far beyond mere protocol. He had become something of a family friend, the man who had literally saved the princess's life through his careful investigation and unwavering dedication to the truth. "Your Royal Highness, you look well. The fresh air agrees with you." "Better than hospital air, certainly," Catherine replied with a smile that reached her eyes for the first time in months. "I wanted to thank you again for everything you did. I know we've had this conversation before, but I don't think I can ever adequately express my gratitude." "No thanks are necessary, Your Highness. I was simply doing my job." "Your job," Catherine repeated thoughtfully, "involved risking your career, possibly your life, to protect someone you barely knew. That goes far beyond duty, Marcus. That was courage." The trial of Queen Victoria and Lady Margaret Ashworth had concluded just weeks earlier, resulting in convictions for attempted murder and conspiracy. Victoria had received a sentence of 25 years in prison, while Margaret received 15 years as an accessory. The evidence that Marcus and Dr. Hartwell had carefully gathered proved decisive in securing the convictions. During the trial, more disturbing details had emerged. Victoria's plan had been even more elaborate than initially suspected. She had been slowly poisoning Catherine while simultaneously working to undermine her reputation through strategic leaks to tabloid photographers and gossip columnists. The ultimate goal had been to make Catherine's eventual death appear like a tragic consequence of her inability to handle royal life. "Have you heard from the former queen recently?" Catherine asked, though her tone suggested she wasn't particularly interested in the answer.
Her Majesty has made it clear she has no interest in any communication from Victoria, Marcus replied diplomatically. I believe the king feels that chapter of his life is permanently closed. King Edward had indeed moved on, though the experience had aged him considerably. He had thrown himself into his royal duties with renewed dedication, as if trying to atone for the damage his wife had nearly caused to the monarchy. The scandal had actually strengthened public support for the royal family, with many seeing them as victims of a manipulative outsider rather than perpetrators of their own drama. Prince Alexander emerged from the castle, looking remarkably different from the tormented man he had been during the crisis. His relationship with Catherine had grown stronger through their shared ordeal, and he carried himself with a new confidence in his role as heir apparent. Marcus, there you are, Alexander said warmly. Catherine and I were just discussing the security arrangements for next month's state visit. Everything is progressing smoothly, Your Royal Highness. Though I must say, it will be refreshing to handle normal security concerns rather than internal threats. Alexander's expression grew serious. We can never take that kind of security for granted again. Victoria's betrayal taught us that the greatest dangers can come from within our own walls. The conversation was interrupted by the arrival of Dr. Elizabeth Hartwell, who had remained close to the royal family since the crisis. Her quick thinking and willingness to investigate Catherine's condition had been crucial to exposing the poisoning plot. Good evening, everyone, she said cheerfully. Catherine, I have your latest test results. I'm happy to report that all traces of the alkaloids have been eliminated from your system. You're completely healthy. That's wonderful news, Catherine replied, though Marcus noticed a shadow cross her face. Sometimes I still worry about long-term effects. Perfectly understandable, Dr. Hartwell said gently. The psychological trauma of poisoning can be more lasting than the physical effects. But, you're strong, and you have excellent support. As if summoned by their conversation, King Edward appeared on the garden path, taking his evening constitutional. At 64, he had developed a more contemplative demeanor since Victoria's conviction, but his fundamental dignity remained unshaken. A family gathering in the garden, he observed with a slight smile. This brings back pleasant memories. Father, Alexander said, we were just discussing security arrangements for the upcoming state visit. Ah yes, the President of France. I imagine Marcus has everything well in hand. The king turned to his head of security. I don't know if I've ever properly thanked you for what you did for this family. Your Majesty, let me finish, King Edward interrupted gently. You saved not just Catherine's life, but the integrity of the crown itself. If Victoria had succeeded in her plans, the damage to the monarchy would have been irreparable. Marcus felt the weight of the king's gratitude and the responsibility it represented. I'm honored to serve this family, Your Majesty. I always will be. About that, King Edward's expression grew more formal. I've been meaning to discuss your future with us. The government has offered you a significant position with MI5, recognizing your investigative skills and discretion. Marcus felt his heart skip. He had heard rumors of such an offer but hadn't expected the king to know about it. Your Majesty, while I'm flattered by the opportunity, my loyalty lies here at Ravenshollow. I know it does, the king replied warmly. Which is why I'm not letting you go anywhere. I'm creating a new position for you, Director of Royal Security and Investigation. Your responsibilities will expand beyond traditional security to include investigating any threats to the royal family, whether internal or external. Catherine clapped her hands together in delight. Marcus, that's wonderful. You'll be able to protect other families from going through what we experienced. The position comes with a significant increase in salary and resources, Alexander added. Father and I discussed it extensively. We need someone we can trust absolutely, and you've more than proven yourself. As the group continued their evening conversation, Marcus reflected on the strange turns his life had taken. 6 months ago, he had been a traditional head of security, concerned primarily with physical threats and protocol breaches. Now he was being offered a position that would make him one of the most important protective figures in the realm.
"There's one more thing," Dr. Hartwell said with a mysterious smile. "I have some news that I think will interest everyone." All eyes turned to her expectantly. "Catherine, Alexander, congratulations. You're going to have a baby." The silence that followed was electric. Catherine's hand flew to her mouth in shock, while Alexander's face cycled through surprise, joy, and protective concern in rapid succession. "Are you certain?" Catherine whispered. "Absolutely. The pregnancy is very early, but all signs are positive. Given your recent medical history, we'll want to monitor things carefully, but there's no reason to expect any complications." King Edward's face lit up with genuine joy for the first time since the crisis began. "A grandchild. This is wonderful news indeed." Alexander pulled Catherine into his arms, and Marcus watched the couple with deep satisfaction. After everything they had endured, they deserved this happiness. The future of the royal line was secure, and it would grow up in a world where the shadows of Victoria's malice had been banished. "This calls for champagne," the king declared. "Marcus, Dr. Hartwell, you must join us for a celebration dinner." As they began walking back toward the castle, Marcus caught Catherine's eye. She mouthed thank you once more, and he nodded respectfully. The debt between them could never really be repaid, but it didn't need to be. Protecting this family and preserving their future was reward enough. The evening celebration was intimate and heartfelt, a stark contrast to the formal dinners of Victoria's era. King Edward made a toast to new beginnings and the resilience of the royal family. Alexander spoke about the importance of truth and loyalty. Catherine, glowing with the news of her pregnancy, thanked everyone for their support during the darkest period of her life. When it came time for Marcus to speak, he kept his words simple. "To the future," he said, raising his glass. "May it be filled with honesty, security, and peace." Later that evening, as Marcus conducted his final security check of the castle, he paused in the corridor outside Catherine's former sitting room, the scene where the poisoning had taken place. The room had been completely redecorated according to Catherine's wishes, transformed from a place of danger into a bright, welcoming space. The events of the past year had changed everyone involved. Catherine had discovered inner strength she never knew she possessed. Alexander had learned to trust his instincts and protect those he loved. King Edward had been reminded that even those closest to us can harbor dangerous secrets. As for Marcus himself, he had learned that sometimes the greatest service one can provide is the willingness to question authority and investigate uncomfortable truths, even when doing so puts one's own position at risk. His secure phone buzzed with a message from his deputy, Lieutenant Morrison, who would soon be promoted to fill Marcus's former position as head of traditional security. "All quiet on the grounds, Captain. No suspicious activity to report." Marcus smiled at the routine nature of the message. After months of conspiracy and danger, routine was exactly what the royal family needed. The ancient stones of Raven's Hollow Castle seemed to radiate peace in the moonlight, their secrets finally brought into the light. The dynasty would continue, stronger for having faced its greatest internal threat and emerged victorious. And Marcus Thornfield would be there to ensure that such dangers never again came so close to destroying everything the crown represented. As he locked his office and prepared to head home, Marcus reflected on the strange career path that had led him from a simple guard to a trusted family protector. Tomorrow would bring new challenges and responsibilities, but tonight, Raven's Hollow Castle slept peacefully under his watchful protection. The future stretched ahead, full of promise for the royal family and the realm they served. Princess Catherine's child would grow up in a world where truth had triumphed over deception, where loyalty had proven stronger than ambition, and where a guard's dedication to justice had saved a dynasty from its darkest hour. The story of Queen Victoria's conspiracy would become a footnote in royal history, a cautionary tale about the dangers of unchecked ambition. But the story of how that conspiracy was defeated would inspire future generations of those sworn to protect the crown. In the end, Marcus Thornfield had done more than save a life or solve a crime. He had preserved the integrity of an institution that had endured for centuries, ensuring that it would continue to endure for centuries to come.